taking lead on spearheading this project, because it's definitely something that will help to inspire the minds and hopefully the hearts of those individuals who care a great deal about this subject matter and really want to be a part of the grassroots movement that we hope to build to ensure that this story is widely told. And so now that I've, got all of that out the way, to your question, Michelle,
Okay.
for me, the first time I watched the documentary, as somebody who, again, is a Chicago native, as somebody who calls North Lawndale home, North Lawndale holds a special place in my heart, primarily because it was one of a handful of communities on the West Side that helped to shape and mold me into the man that I am today.
Mm-hmm.
And when I think about this story that, Bruce was able to tell through visual arts, it really forced me to take a step back and think deeply about my public education experience from K through 12th grade, as somebody who is a proud product of the Chicago public school system. And in the process of me doing that reflecting, it was apparent to me that this is something that was never covered in any way throughout my K to 12 education.
That's right.
Fast forward to my post-secondary education, from my years as an undergraduate, throughout graduate school, even during my PhD program. There was no mention or comprehensive treatment of the subject matter that Bruce, again, was able to share with us by way of this documentary. And so for me, it really forced me to think more deeply about why that is indeed the case. And what was it about this story, which is one of many, if we think about how structural racism has unfolded in America, especially during the Jim Crow era. What was it that was so potent or dangerous about this radical truth telling, which is essentially what Bruce's film is? This is a version of radical truth telling, but it's something that we have yet to really have indoctrinated into our public systems and public institutions that are chiefly responsible for educating the minds of the people writ large. And so I don't want to, dominate the conversation, so I'll stop there.
That's a great answer. We appreciate it. And I thank you. I'm going to move on to Tonika. Tonika, I know that you are a proud resident of Inglewood. And that you're one of its
okay.
I have one for next time, even if it's fake. But no, we recognize that you're a proud resident of Inglewood. Do you have any family members that experienced this contract buying? Do you know of any families in Inglewood that did? And, if you've talked to them about it, what did you learn from them that maybe was reinforced by the movie, or maybe was not even the movie? Talk to us about your knowledge and personal experience with this.
Well, just like you and Dr. Boyd, I wasn't aware of this information, and it wasn't until I was introduced to Bruce's documentary, and specifically the map of Greater Inglewood that they provided as a supplement to the screening that they did in Inglewood, that it was brought to my knowledge that this even occurred. I, just growing up, felt the history of something unfortunate and deeply problematic happened within Greater Inglewood, and I know that I was living the consequences of it, which those consequences is what inspired me to create Folded Map, to show the present day impact. But what I was missing was the information that Bruce's documentary provided. And so once I became aware of the documentary and was just taken aback by the actual map of Greater Inglewood that showed that basically 80% of the homes in Inglewood were purchased on land sale contract.
Can you repeat that one more time? I'm sorry, repeat that percentage one more time.
Yes, 80% of the homes in Inglewood were purchased on land sale contracts in the 50s and 60s. Once that information was shared with me, it clicked. I was like, oh, this is the event that occurred that started the downward trajectory of the neighborhood that I lived in, that I have a whole project about. So for me, I wanted to really dig deep into finding out more families, or just not even the families, but just the actual structures, the homes, because it's living history. Once Bruce and Amber shared the addresses of the actual homes in Greater Inglewood that were bought on land sale contracts, I was like, they're all around me, like literally down the street from me. So I started driving around and seeing these homes and photographing them and talking to the people who lived on those blocks about those homes and their history there. And it was just even more eye-opening because they spoke the exact truth that Bruce's film was sharing. They talked about, oh yeah, my parents purchased this house. We were one of the few first Black homeowners on this block. And it was within 2 weeks that all of the white homeowners were gone. And I remember they started sharing with me their memory of it as I was photographing these homes. And so it just unlocked a piece of history and truth about the devastation that my neighborhood that I still live in, that my grandmother migrated to for better opportunity, what these families have struggled through, and why my neighborhood is the way that it is. And so it really helped me understand how gun violence, low home ownership, school closures, no business corridors are all the symptoms of this huge disease, this huge tragedy that occurred in the 50s and 60s.
Thank you, Tonika. That is an excellent answer. I'm going to go over to Bruce now because, you know, we're talking about the impact of the film and how we've all learned from it. Let me ask you why you made this movie. Like, where did this idea come from?
Well, I didn't go to school to become a filmmaker. I actually spent the I don't know, first 15 years or so of my career being a community organizer. And so the film comes from that kind of background. And I'll explain that in a moment. But the film, what I really wanted to do is I wanted to be an educational tool and an inspirational tool that people can use for mobilizing other people for change. You know, for change around the need for affordable housing, for change around the need for racial disparities, the wealth gap, and those things that Tonika just mentioned. We have a racial wealth gap that is really, it's a chasm. And we have, you know, a number of, you know, concentrated poverty in our cities. This isn't just Chicago too. It's Cleveland, it's Baltimore, it's Milwaukee, it's Detroit, it's St. Louis. So the story that takes place in Chicago is taking place in other cities around throughout the country. And as a result, or not as a result of, but, you know, during these years of the Great Migration, both the first wave and the second wave, and the whole Shame of Chicago series will cover that whole history and explain how Chicago came to be segregated and how all our northern cities and many of our western cities came to be racially segregated. And it's a story that most people don't know. And it was not a story that was told in classrooms. But it is a story that informs everything that we do today. And so to understand this story, which we hope in about a year, we're still under production for it. To understand this history will, in our hopes, fuel people who are out there wanting to do something about this issue, wanting to learn more. You know, it's the first step in change, is understanding how we got to where we are today.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Bruce. You know, it's funny that it's interesting that you mentioned that it's a story that's not told. It's not in, graduate school curriculum. It's all the way down to, grammar school. But it's also a story that was not told to my generation. Tonika, Clinton, I assume we're all that third generation, of people whose families settled in the North. Nobody in my family ever talked to me about this, and I can't help but wonder if it because there was shame associated with it, or that's just maybe the way people dealt collectively with trauma, or maybe they felt like it wasn't important to us. But Clinton, I'm going to pivot back to you. How does this film change the way you understand your community and what your parents and grandparents went through? As that third generation, talk to me about how this informs your perspective and how you see their experiences in the North.
Most definitely, and this is a wonderful question. And just to build off of the point, you and Tonika made about the essentially Chicago being the false promised land. For those individuals who were fleeing racial persecution in the Jim Crow South, for those individuals who were pursuing economic opportunities within the Midwest and the Northeast, and also out on the West Coast. For my parents, both of whom were sharecroppers. My father is a native of Tutwiler/Webb, Mississippi, which is the Delta portion of Mississippi. My mother, for example, has her roots in Osceola, Arkansas, which again is a southern city. And for both of them, they were a part of the last wave of individuals who were a part of the Great Migration, who came north in hopes of improving their lot. However, upon arriving in the city, they quickly discovered that Chicago was not all that it was cracked up to be. And the overt racism that they were fleeing in the South was basically replaced by the covert forms of racism that occupied cities like Chicago and other list of Midwestern cities that Bruce named. And so when I just think about that in relation to the film, and I think about that in connection to the current status of communities that, again, I call home, it helps me to better appreciate and understand why the communities are in a sad state of affairs today. When you have neighborhoods that have been economically exploited, specifically in a 2-decade period, to the point where conservative estimates suggest that $3.2 to $4 billion were extracted from African American households, it basically makes a bad situation even worse. Because when you think about how wealth is used within families today, wealth creates opportunities for folks to take their assets and use them to ensure that they have access to the various opportunity structures that will improve their quality of life. But when you have entire communities that have been strategically and purposely placed in ghettos because we didn't create them, and I think this film helps us to, again, better appreciate the neighborhoods that we call home in inner city Chicago, especially for Black residents, very much resemble the colonies of the 17th century. And that's something that for me is very, was something that was very eye-opening as I thought about Bruce's project within a historical context.
Thank you. I really appreciate your reference to 17th century history. So we jump from the 17th century to, the 50s and 60s in Chicago. And sadly, it's still happening in 2020. I'm not sure if you all know this, but last week, the Consumer Financial Protection Board pressed charges against a mortgage lender here in Chicago for redlining. Okay. And this guy, and what's crazy is the guy who owned this mortgage company, he wasn't covert about it. He actually had a radio program that he used to promote, his mortgage lending business. But on that program, he was talking about how he doesn't lend to Black people in Black neighborhoods. So, it's a lesson that people just haven't learned, unfortunately, and it's still happening in 2020. Tonika, I'm going to pivot over to you. I want you to talk to us a little bit more about the Folded Map Project and whether or not, or how you've integrated this, information about contract buying into your presentations and conversations between South Side and North Side residents. Are people, have you been able to get people into a room or an online forum, in this case, to talk about it?
Yes, I have. I immediately incorporated the map of Greater Inglewood that highlighted all of the homes that were purchased on land sale contracts into my Folded Map presentations, because one of the leading questions that I asked prior to knowing about Shame of Chicago was, one, does our segregation reflect how we want to interact? And then also, what do you think of Inglewood? What have you heard of Inglewood? What are the problems that you've heard of Inglewood? And throughout all of my presentations, everyone says the same thing, violence, poor people. And so I was able to insert this information about land sale contracts into my presentations to offer an answer, to show that this is not where the story starts. Present day Inglewood. There is a history, and it's a history that I'm learning about, that I'm also sharing with you. There were tools and mechanisms that were put into place to make Inglewood what it is today. So I have definitely had the opportunity to share this new information with my most recent audiences virtually, and they've been equally receptive and excited to learn more about it. So with the blessing of Bruce and the lead researchers of the Shame of Chicago, I am going to continue to document and photograph the existing homes that were purchased on land sale contracts in Inglewood, because my eventual goal is to not only share that information in an exhibition, but to have a collection of these homes become a landmark, because they should be. People should be able to visit these homes and understand what they mean. And it just amazes me as a resident of Inglewood that it's so many of them still here, even though a lot of them have turned into vacant lots, which is also a present day issue within Inglewood. But it's all to raise, to amplify the issue of land acquisition here and what it means. And the more that I learn about this, the more that it reminds me of what the indigenous people here went through, legalized theft of land. And so for me, this is a way to also connect with our indigenous brothers and sisters still here in Chicago about land acquisition, the importance of it, and how the history of it being stolen from us has played out.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you so much, Dr. Boyd. I'm going to pivot back to you. And this is a little bit off the beaten path from, what we talked about before the call. But, something that I keep hearing is, education, the fact that this knowledge has not been shared with people. You're in the academy, you've got this wonderful PhD, you have this ability to influence, curriculum. And so as an educator, tell us how we can get this information into, the canon of American history. Like, what is it going to take? Who's going to take that lead to make sure that, it doesn't all rest on Bruce?
Right. Yeah, this is something that I have dedicated a great deal of thought to over the past several months, because as I've opened up with my remarks, this history wasn't a part of my academic training process throughout school. And it was really something that, through the grace of God, fell in my lap, because I had an opportunity to, again, meet Bruce. We are good colleagues now, and I can share this information with other colleagues within my immediate circle to help them to appreciate the true gem that we have in our possession by way of this film, with the hopes that they then will begin to report out and share this information with other individuals within the academic institutions that they call home. But ultimately, it's going to require an institutional shift, and the individuals who are in positions of power within many of our academic institutions have to see value in ensuring that material such as the one that Bruce created is mandated. This has to be a part of a curriculum.
Exactly.
When we start having conversations about certain intro courses, if it's an intro to urban planning course, if it's an intro to sociology course, if it's an intro to African American studies course, I do believe, especially like in post-secondary settings, we need to make sure that certain subject matter is institutionalized.
Exactly.
And then use that as an opportunity to continue to drive the conversation forward.
Thanks. So we can use this episode, a year from now, we can use the entire series. We can make sure that it's integrated into a university curriculum. I know that a friend of mine, Jeff Spitz at Columbia College, he teaches documentary filmmaking, and he has already expressed his desire to integrate, this episode, if not the entire series, into his filmmaking coursework, so that his students see, what he calls social impact filmmaking at its best. So Bruce, you're going to get a call. I know you all know each other, but
Yeah.
people who are in the academy who see it realize right away that there's a gap that needs to be filled. Now, Bruce, aside from your film and the series that's going to be completed, and I don't want to put you on the spot, are there any books that people, watching this conversation can go out and pick up so that they can get more, educate themselves as they wait for the rest of the series to be completed?
There are any number of books. The one that has been probably most in the public eye has been The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein. And I think it does a very good job of summarizing the country's path to how we segregated and all the impacts through how it impacted our cities all through the years. And, from everything from really understanding redlining to understanding restrictive covenants to understanding the development of public housing and how all that got cited to the creation of the suburbs. In some ways, The Shame of Chicago is going to recount, using first-person testimony and people's stories, that kind of history. So eventually, we're going to have. So that's one book that people can read. There's there's so many.
Maybe
good
one
books,
more.
so
Maybe one more you can recommend.
One more book. I just read a wonderful book. By an ex-Chicago Tribune editor. It's about Jesse Binga. It's called Binga. And Jesse Binga, very quickly, I'll be very quick. Jesse Binga was the richest Black man in Chicago in the 1920s and a little bit. And it's a fascinating story about Jesse Binga. But as he tells the story of Jesse Binga, he is telling the story of how segregation came to take hold in Chicago in 1900. Jesse Binga comes here in 1900, 1903, something like that. And so I would say that's a very compelling read. And I'm going to throw out one more book that's really, really critical. And Clinton knows this, by our colleague and the founder of the Cook Center. And that's called From Here to Equality. This is really, really, and it's eye-popping opening to me, who I think has studied this kind of issue, but I haven't studied, what happened during the Civil War and what happens like a little bit after the Civil War, and I haven't delved deeply into Reconstruction. And Sandy Darity, who's the author of the book, along with his partner, Kirsten Mullen, have written this outstanding history that will be revelatory in understanding that we tried reparations at one point, and it was actually pushed forward by Lincoln and General Sherman, and it was undermined very quickly. And it just gives so much weight and call to the need for reparations today.
Mm-hmm. Great. That's excellent. I'm glad that you mentioned that. So we got a question from Jeff Spitz, who I mentioned earlier, who's watching live. And he asked, is this the beginning of a real case for reparations? Clinton Boyd, what do you think?
I mean, yes, I think Bruce's docuseries contributes mightily to the conversation that is longstanding at this point about what it means to have a reparations program in place that really takes into account the various tiers of racialized oppression in America. And I think it's very important for me to spell that out to our viewing audience, primarily because there's a misconception about reparations being solely tied and linked to the era of slavery. Slavery reparations is a misnomer, because part of what Bruce documents in his film is that you had another form of racialized oppression that followed slavery, that followed Reconstruction during the Jim Crow era. And because of the practices at the public and private level, African Americans found themselves in positions where if they had wealth, it was taken away from them, either by brute force or by means of trickery and chicanery. And if there was a situation whereby we move from the Jim Crow practices and we think about the ongoing forms of racialized discrimination that is wreaking havoc in Black people's lives today, the continuous, perpetual killings of unarmed Black men and women will be something that forces us to, say that this is another thing that we have to contend with, and also mass incarceration. Yeah. And so for me, I think this film definitely ties into the conversation, and I have more to say about reparations, but I'll just place a pin in it for now.
Okay. Thank you, Tonika. What's your view on reparations and how the information in this film could feed an argument for reparations?
Yeah, it definitely adds to the evidence of why it's justifiable and necessary, along with some other works that have been done. I'm thinking of The Warmth of Other Suns by Isabella Wilkerson.
Right.
One of my favorite books.
Yes.
All time.
I have a dream of what to do with that book. And then also Cycle of Segregation by Dr. Maria Creason. There's a body of work that collectively together can easily express a case for reparations. And then not only those books and these films, but just also talking to people. I would hope that the individuals that participated in my project, even though it's an art project, but it's still a sociological study of how these mechanisms to segregate our city has impacted our social networks and our psychology of how we view each other. And so in addition to reparations, I would hope that we can also discuss and bring into the conversation about the psychological impact of both Black, white, Latino, Asians, how this has helped us perpetuate our own kind of segregation within our social network. So yes, that's my contribution to what this can do for reparations.
Thank you. Now we got a great question here that our producer forwarded to our chat line, and it's from Nathan Anderson, and his question is: how do I inform my white friends who feel reparations are ridiculous or impossible? So we're all African Americans, second, third generation Great Migration witnesses, right? We see it, we understand it, we've lived it. But there are a lot of people who are not African American who are dubious, about the idea of reparations. How can we frame the discussion for them so that they see it from our perspective? Like, what does that look like?
You don't focus on them. You
Okay.
don't focus on them. For me, I personally believe
Mhm.
you focus on the allies and informing them so that they can communicate to those, because
Okay.
those individuals. It's well, you have to do both. You have to try to persuade that group as well. But what I'm personally more interested in is providing tools for allies to be the mouthpiece in those social networks and in those spaces where I'm not operating in, or that I don't have access to, because I don't run across a lot of people who are against reparations.
Right. Or who are going to tell you that they're against reparations.
Exactly.
Right.
But I definitely, in my social network, have people who want to learn more, have white friends who want to learn more, and so that they can express that to their own families.
Yeah.
So I think we have to really personalize our communication about this. It's not just, some mass campaign that needs to happen. It's the conversations in our interpersonal relationships. Young white professionals or young white liberals who are interested in educating themselves about this issue, they're going to have to talk to their families, and hopefully that will broaden the conversation. And that's just the reality of this kind of travesty, is that it really impacts how we communicate with each other. So we can have all of this information as we do, but how we share it is the most important. It has to get interpersonal.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me jump in here. 2 months ago, this country has been transformed in just 2 months with the protests that have taken place across the country.
Yeah.
And now we're seeing statues come down. We're seeing military bases that generals saying we need to rename our military bases. We're seeing people and many, many white people, which was very encouraging, that were part of the protests that were taking place. So there's a much greater awareness today, even after 2 months of this kind of shock protest movement that has taken root across the country. And so I think, which has opened up so many doors for so many conversations, and now the conversation for reparations. So I think we're at the beginning of this, of something that has maybe some potential, but something like reparations, which would be, this, kind of seismic change in America's history, if we were to get to that point. At least what has happened in the past 2 months has started that conversation a little bit. And a lot of education needs to take place, and change, really meaningful change, meaningful like reparations, or very meaningful change about this country even admitting what happened to African Americans and what took place, and incorporating this history into our classrooms and starting to educate people and build a constituency and build a movement and a foundation to have that kind of discussion. So I think it's very, very long term. And I think in addressing the question about how do you talk to your white friends, well, you start by maybe getting them to see this documentary, and getting them to be more informed about other. I mean, there's so many wonderful documentaries out there. There's the recent one, it's the 13th, which is on Netflix. Really hard-hitting historical pieces that unpack our history in a way that we've never seen. One of the things that Sandy Darity and Kirsten Mullen, in their book From Here to Equality, and that's a good place to start, by the way, From Here to Equality, because I think it's going to be the textbook on reparations. One of the things they talk about is something called dismemory. And I hadn't heard that phrase before. I don't know, maybe it's a phrase that's used in sociology, Clinton. I don't know, but for me, it was a new phrase. And we have no historical memory in this country other than this narrative that's been created that is so far from the reality of so many people and generations of people.
Yes.
And so we have to get to a new narrative. And in order to do that, it takes a lot of education, but it takes the protests to shake things up, to get people's attention, and to start listening.
Great,
Yeah.
excellent. I love
Can I
that
quickly
answer. Yes,
can I
go ahead.
quickly respond
Quickly, yes.
to Nathan's question? You know, I'll be curious to know if all of Nathan's friends hold this unfortunate view about reparations, because if not, I would encourage Nathan to have conversations with his white friends who may be in support of reparations, with the hopes that he can persuade those individuals to focus that energy on our federally elected officials. Because when we have conversations about reparations, I often hear folks from the majority community talk about, they personalize the conversation as if we're trying to take something from them
Bingo.
individually. But that's really not what this conversation is about, because when you think about a reparations program, the culpable party is the federal government. It was federal laws and policies since the inception of the American Republic in 1776 that created that created the atmosphere for these grievous atrocities to take place here on U.S. soil. And so when we talk about reparations, we really need to develop a movement that encompasses individuals, institutions, academic, faith-based institutions, any institution that wants to be a part of the movement for transformative change in this country, to put pressure on the federal government and help them to finally understand that this is something that we want and this is something that we need. And also, and I say this in closing, back to Bruce's point about the disremembrance campaign that took place in the aftermath of Reconstruction in our country, because there was a brief period in U.S. history where we had Black congressmen, and we had individuals who owned land, but the Night Riders and the Ku Klux Klan, they took it all away from us. After Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, and President Andrew Johnson came into power, and he basically got rid of the Freedmen's Bureau that led to the members of the planter class, who were previously the individuals that held our ancestors in bondage, allowed them to regain possession of the land that they literally took away from us. Yeah. And so with that being said, for me, there's a component of Sandy and Kirsten's reparations program that deals specifically with closure. And a part of this program deals with ensuring that our public schools are actually going to tell the true story about America's racial history. And I think Bruce's film fits nicely into the third component of Sandy and Kirsten's reparations program, because it's going to help to shift the narrative in a way that is going to speak to the true reality of racialized oppression here in America.
Bingo. Excellent. Thank you very much. I'm going to shift away from federal policy back to the South Side of Chicago. So, you know, we are the Chicago Southside Film Festival. I have never labeled the festival an African American or Black festival, because I want to acknowledge the complexity of the population of the South Side of Chicago. We have a large Latino population. We have a large Asian population. I tell people Chinatown is on the South Side, and we've been fortunate to screen. We were able to screen a film about the Chinese Exclusion Act laws and the Chinese American Museum of Chicago. And we have very strong ties with people in that community. Mount Greenwood, right, is on the South Side of Chicago. We've got a lot more diversity on the South Side of Chicago than most people would commonly acknowledge. And so there's a question here from one of our audience members about how segregation and redlining that are discussed in the film have affected other communities of color. Let's talk about, you know, why Chinatown. I'm not sure if anybody knows why Chinatown exists, why it is where it is, about the fact that it used to be in what's now the Loop. in Chicago that there was a large Chinese settlement that was displaced because that land became very valuable. Let's talk about, Little Village. Let's talk about Mount Greenwood, right? Let's talk about Marquette Park and why it was one of the last parts of the South Side of Chicago to become integrated. So I don't know if any of you, have enough knowledge or a comfort level with these, various non-African American South Side communities to talk about them and where they are in the context of Bruce's film.
Well, I don't know if I can directly answer that question. I think you bring up what I think everybody should be tuning into what is going to be happening with the Southside Chicago, the Chicago Southside Film Festival, because it's really something special that you're developing here, Michelle, for the city. And and it's through this kind of festival that we can have this discussion that we're having today. And I have been so thrilled with the way that you've, embraced the color tax and the shame of Chicago. And in turn, I've really embraced the Chicago Southside Film Festival as a real treasure for this city. So I think it's an unwritten history that we just don't have in Chicago. And I think very, very few people know about it. I know just a little smidgen about what you're talking about when it comes to Chinatown. I know the history of transformation in Chicago, obviously in what happened with African Americans here. Some of that, Mexicans were brought in during the 1920s, for example, in the southeast side of Chicago to be strike breakers for U.S. Steel. And so you have a growing Mexican-American community that started to form in the southeast side of the city. And then that moved, and then, there's other reasons why, you have a large Mexican community and Latinx community in Pilsen and Little Village and so on. We don't know, and it's a really a great question that I bet 98% of Chicagoans have no idea how to answer.
Yeah, and it's just because that is not included in the Chicago history that we're taught, in Chicago public schools or in private schools. I don't think kids at Lab or Latin are learning it either. It's not included. It's really not part of the public dialogue or discourse, and I hope that it will be. I'm sure there's somebody somewhere studying it, getting ready for their, to defend their dissertation. And I hope they raise their hand, and send us a message and say, can I talk to Bruce? Can you include me in one of his future episodes? Or, can someone raise their hand and say, there's a documentary that came out a couple years ago, about the fact that Chinatown is under intense gentrification. About the fact that Little Village is undergoing intense gentrification. Like I'd like to talk to someone about, gentrification in Bronzeville and what that's going to look like, in the 2020 census and the 2030 census. So we're just trying to create, a space where people not only in Chicago, but, all over the world can have that conversation and acknowledge the complexity of what's happening on Chicago's South Side. For instance, there was a film called Blueprint for Bronzeville that was made in 2014, 2013, that was about the blueprints that the U.S. Olympic Committee had for Bronzeville, as part of that was spelled out in Chicago's bid for the Olympics. A lot of people don't know that if Chicago had gotten the 2016 Olympics, Bronzeville would look very different than it does now. The Olympic Village would have been on 31st Street. A lot of the older housing in Bronzeville would have been, taken away from the owners through eminent domain. We'd have a very different South Side had the city gotten the Olympics, and it was posed as an opportunity for economic development. A lot of people saw through it, and there was a lot of dissent that did not get coverage in the media. But these young filmmakers, I think one from New Hampshire, I think he was a student at Dartmouth when he started this film. So over the course of, the years of the run up to the Olympic, the choice for the 2016 Olympics, it was documented, and it's a very good movie. And it literally is about Bronzeville, and it was shown all over the world, but never on the South Side of Chicago. Like literally. So until like when we heard about the film and decided to put it in the 2018 festival, I asked the filmmakers, I said, okay, who are we competing with? Are you showing this during the, the film festival season? Where else have you shown it? And they sheepishly acknowledged, well, we've never actually screened it on the South Side. So we were able to get some space at the Parkway Ballroom, and we screened it in Bronzeville. And the majority of the people who were in the film showed up. And we filled we filled the Parkway Ballroom, and it literally was one of the best post-film screening discussions that we've ever had. And I'm very thankful for IIT. They underwrote the cost of that screening, and they were very supportive. But it just reinforces our mission, right? So we have a two-part mission, which is to give Southside filmmakers the opportunity to screen their films in their own communities. And the second part of our mission is broader. It is to use film as a tool for community engagement and intellectual engagement. So, Bruce, when I learned about your film through word of mouth, I decided that I was going to hunt you down and persuade you to let us screen it. And I'm glad that I didn't have to work very hard to persuade you.
No, not
and
at
I'm
all.
very flattered that you've allowed us to bring it into the community. This is our third screening. We screened it in Bronzeville at the Illinois Institute at IIT. We screened it at Providence Bank in February. And Tonika and Clint, I don't know if y'all know this, but Bruce and I had this plan to screen it, in 100 other places, not just in the South Side, but we were working our way up to a tour. Like we wanted everybody on the South Side to be able to have access to see this film for free. The quarantine happened, we're online. Right. But the minute that everybody can safely assemble in theaters, we're going to be, in churches, we're going to be in schools, we're going to be in universities, we're going to be in people's homes, we're going to be projecting it onto the side of buildings in the summertime. We're going to be everywhere because this, to a certain extent, this is really, really, really important to American history, Chicago history, and Southside history. None of us would be here. Tonika, Clinton, Michelle, myself, none of us would be here. And where we are today, doing what we're doing, with the goals and objectives that we have, had our grandparents and parents not lived through this history. So, hats off to Bruce. Bruce, let's talk about what it's going to take for you to finish this series. You mentioned you hope it'll be another year, but let's talk about the resources that you're going to need. Do you have, I know that this episode includes a couple of people who, signed those contracts and lived through it. How many of them are still around? How many people are you talking to? Let's talk about what it's going to take to finish the series.
Well, only a handful of people are still around, and maybe in the next 5-10 years, there won't be any. There's some children who remember the difficulties their parents went through. But it's as time marches on. So, that part of personal testimony. That's why I did this. That's why I did this first, by the way. It's really episode 3 in a whole series that starts at 1900. But because of a few people who are still alive today, I really wanted to get to them right away. And that's why we did episode 3. So, right, this is a really good segue to what you were saying, as, we really want to get this out there. And I'm looking at some questions, some comments, and saying, how do we get this in our schools? How do we get this? I want to bring this to my, school administrator. I want to, this is going to be a lift. And what we, since we've had the pandemic and we had all these screenings that we had to cancel, and now we're just trying, this is the first time we're doing an online kind of screening of it. I did something else with some people in Park Ridge, by the way, separately. And we had a great conversation, and people in Park Ridge now opened the door up for me to show it to people in Wilmette and Glenview. And, so we've got some other screenings in the offing. The point being that this is going to be a lift by all of us, by people who want to see this in our schools. You want to see this in your neighborhood. You want a screening at your, to people at your church, your synagogue, your mosque. Do you want a screening to people at your workplace, your realty company, your law firm, whatever it may be? We can make arrangements for that. and we are available to do that. We want to create a tremendous amount of buzz around the series as I'm developing the rest of the series. And I hope to have it done within 18 months. WTTW has agreed to broadcast it. WBEZ wants to then supplement the broadcast with a number of stories that will parallel the showing. And if we build up kind of a real broad awareness of, let's say, hundreds of people who have seen the color text, and for those people who watch today and have seen the color text, we'll let you know about the next episode that comes up, and you'll get a sneak preview of the next episode. But we want you to also come forward and say, hey, I would like to show this to a whole group of people that we know, maybe 25, 35, 50 people. It doesn't have to be in the hundreds. Mm-hmm. And we'll be there to show it. And the more people that know about it, the more they can do social media about it, the more we can spread the word, so that when it does show on WTTW, I hope that the mayor will be coming out with a speech saying, I want everybody in the city to see this. And I want everybody in the suburbs to see this. Yeah. And, and that's the first step. And that's the step in making this a long-term go-to educational tool that will last for many years, because it's going to be many years that this struggle, as it has throughout our American history, continue. And so we're looking for people. Sign up right now. Let us know how you want to be part of this outreach campaign. You want to, Nathan, other people out there, you want to convince other people, set up a screening. We'll be here to help with that screening. We'll be here to, help build excitement around and buzz around this film series that everybody in Chicago should see and know. It should become, part of the narrative of our city.
Excellent. Thank you, Tonika. We've only got a few minutes left. Can we get your closing comments? What do you want to share with our viewers?
Yes, I really want to help people understand how arts in all mediums can really help amplify not only this issue, but so many issues. Speaking to your point about other communities of color that have experienced the impact of systemic racism, I just want to highlight a fellow artist friend of mine, Sandra Delgado, who has a play called La Havana Madrid, which was about the Caribbean club on Chicago's North Side that really spoke to the different stories of Latinx people when they were coming to Chicago through those programs, working at the steel mills. That was the first time I had ever really understood the Latinx population's introduction to Chicago. And then I was able to connect that to my father's story when he actually worked at a steel mill and he had a lot of Latino friends, and I never understood that. So the arts are also going to be very critical in expanding the reach of these very important issues and making it connectable and accessible to people who might not read, the books that we mentioned, or who might not have access to Bruce's actual documentary. And then also, getting advice from artists on creative ways to infuse these tools into education, like make it a resource for teachers. Teachers can select their resources that they infuse into their own lesson plans and curriculums. And I know that's something that I'm doing with Folded Map, and Bruce could easily do, actually make this available for educators so that they can start infusing it into their own lesson plans and curriculums to share with their students.
Great, thank you. If we have anybody from Chicago Public Schools watching, please go to Bruce's website or go to the Chicago Southside Film Festival website or on social media and send us your name and contact information. Let's get started on some curriculum. Let's get that ball rolling. I'm sorry to interrupt you, Bruce. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say actually just that. And a really important group called Facing History and Ourselves is going to write the curriculum for the Shame of Chicago documentary series. So, we've got the ball rolling on that already. So, everybody who's watching here, you want to help move this forward. It's going to take maybe 500, 1,000 of us to really generate more excitement about this. And, we've got a ways to go still in raising money. So if there's people who know, other people at foundations and so on, that's also critical. So please visit Shame of Chicago website, write to me. I'll definitely get back to you.
Yes, he will.
Let's make it all happen. And also check. You got to check into the Folded Map Project. Even though Tonika was getting press about it all over the place about a year and a half ago, it's still critically important. And I'm really looking forward to the next event that's taking place. What is it? August.
August 16th, right?
Yes. Yeah.
We're shameless. We're shameless on these plugs.
It's going down.
In mid-August, same bat time, same bat station. I know I'm aging myself with that. We'll be back here again in about a month to view Tonika Lewis Johnson's latest creation, vis-a-vis the Folded Map Project. And we will be here having a conversation about her work, what it is informed by, how, what her creative vision is and what it means not only to Inglewood, but to all of Chicago. So, I want to thank all of my panelists. I want to thank everybody on Facebook and YouTube. I want to thank everybody that watched the movie but didn't quite make it over to the panel discussion. We value and appreciate your time. You've got Bruce's, we can share on Facebook and YouTube. We can share Bruce's website for Shame of Chicago. I'm also going to ask our producer to share the website for the film festival. We'd love to hear from you. We'll add you to our mailing list, and we want to hear what you think and how you feel about this film and everything else that we're doing for the festival. So very, very soon on social media and in direct emails, you'll get information about our upcoming collaboration with Tonika. And I'm going to go ahead and thank everyone for your time. Thank you, panelists, and I look forward to working with all of you.
Can I say one thing?
Yes, Dr. Boyd, go right ahead.
Yeah. Just to build off of Bruce's very important point, there is still so much work left to be done in regards to this project. And for those of you all who are in the listening and viewing audience, just know that organized people defeat organized power. And what we really need is a grassroots movement that is going to allow us to lift Bruce's project into the spaces and places where it rightfully deserves to be. You have folks who historically have funded social movements. You have individuals historically who have been intellectual leaders of social movements. You have had individuals who come from communities of faith who have prayed for the good graces of individuals who are on the ground doing the work. And so again, whatever your contribution may be in order to move this project forward, I feel comfortable in speaking for Bruce and saying that we gladly welcome it. Because
you can speak for me anytime.
Yeah. So yeah, that's my those are my final words.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Chicago South Film Festival meets meets Shame of Chicago, meets Folded Map Project, meets Duke University Du Bois Cook Center. We're all here. It's all in our hearts and minds, and I look forward to working with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.